If you're looking to improve at Tracer, you've come to the right video. In this guide, I will show you the best way to learn Tracer and improve all the way from a complete beginner to an expert level. To do this, we're going to go through the introduction, where I will talk about the mindset that you should have when playing Tracer, since it is very unique to her, the basics, which is understanding your target prioritization, and the methods that you can use to obtain value for your team, along with the basic tips and tricks. To advance, where we'll talk more about the mechanics, how to collect more eliminations, and maximize your value potential in every team fight, and then to expert, covering her matchups. All of this will be divided into chapters below so that you can easily access any part of it and come back to this video as you progress. I hope this guide is useful, and without further ado, let's get into it. There are two main reasons that people have difficulty learning Tracer. The first one is that her playstyle is completely unique. There are other heroes that mimic some parts of Tracer, but never exactly. There are, of course, other characters that want to go into the flank and that can even go in and out and bait out cooldowns in the way that Tracer does, but their final execution and their main goal is not the same. The other is that much of the value that is obtained when playing Tracer is not easily visible. You might see on the scoreboard that you have a 1-to-1 KDA or even negative, and feel like you're not doing a good job and be incentivized to swap off or never play the character again, when it's very possible that even with a negative KDA, your impact on Tracer could have been game-winning depending on the rank. So in order to understand the very unique playstyle that Tracer has, we first need to explain the concept of value in Overwatch. Value can be understood as how much efficiency you obtain for the amount of resources dedicated to something. To put that into the most basic example, if two teams go head-to-head on a symmetrical map, they both have the same exact compositions and they have the same number of shots and cooldowns available to them. The team that wins that fight would have obtained more value from the same exact resources. This value can be very subjective, however. What has more value to a team, an Ana or a Tracer? Most people would probably say that an Ana is more valuable, so if you as Tracer trade 1-for-1 for an Ana, you still came ahead on the value trade. And very often that would be correct, but there are 1,000 other factors here. Maybe the Ana is already doing a very poor job, and you could have obtained a lot more value as Tracer than simply trading 1-for-1. The easiest way to measure value tends to be by looking at how many eliminations you have compared to the number of deaths. But that doesn't tell the whole story. This isn't a game where frags are everything. It's much closer to a MOBA in many aspects than people care to admit. This is why, especially at the beginning of your journey when learning Tracer, I want you to focus on value as your core objective instead of just padding stats and getting a lot of damage and getting a lot of eliminations. Coming to grips with a lot of the mechanics that Tracer uses can be difficult in its own right, and just learning to accurately track throughout dashes with Tracer can take a very long time. And I don't want you to be discouraged and think that you're not good enough for this or that you should just play a different hero if you enjoy playing Tracer. Instead of that, focus on the value obtained. Every time that somebody uses a cooldown because you're being an annoying little mosquito in their ear, you obtained value. I like to explain this with a simple thought experiment. Let's keep going with this Ana and Tracer dynamic. If you as Tracer dive the backline and start going for Ana, if that Ana then turns around and tries to sleep you, starts shooting at you, throws the biotic grenade to heal herself, maybe this entire encounter could last around 6 to 7 seconds. And in the end, you recalled, you didn't die, and Ana didn't die. You could say that you failed your job, but stop for a minute and think, what is the difference between Ana being eliminated and Ana not doing anything for her team for those 7 seconds? Absolutely none. There is no difference. You basically got an elimination that only lasted 7 seconds and that could have been enough for your team to win a fight. Not only that, but on the value perspective, if Ana is trying to eliminate you, she is not healing her team, she is not charging her ultimate, she is not providing any value to her team when you as a Tracer have the specialty of reducing value from the enemy team. Yes, you can get a ton of value from Tracer. You can get double and triple kills, you can get multi-kills with your pulse bomb, you can get solo eliminations, but those come with time. For now, Just think that every time somebody uses resources on you, you took away value from their team. With that mindset in place, a lot of learning the basics of Tracer is on where to focus to steal as much value as possible from the enemy team. Tracer's overall playstyle is fast, frantic, and requires constant adaptation. You develop game sense on Tracer better than on any other character in my opinion, because you will try and maximize that value stealing from anywhere. But generally, and a good tip for when you're starting out, is to try and take that value away from the enemy supports. While, especially in the state that Overwatch is at the moment, it can be practically impossible to solo kill the two enemy supports, you can distract both of them to the point that they are not doing anything for their team. And if you manage to do this, you should consider it a victory just as much as if you had eliminated them, because you probably opened up an opportunity for your team to break through. So let's move on to beginners. In this section, I'm going to focus on how to play Tracer correctly, just standardly without making any mistake that will allow you to keep practicing these fundamentals and improve. One of the first things that I learned on Tracer was that you should treat your dashes equally as valuable as your recall. Good spatial awareness to allow you to dash to a location where somebody won't be able to target you or where you will make them miss is just as good as recalling. Recalling should be saved for when you make mistakes. In other words, if you're trying to dodge a skill shot, you should always attempt to dodge it with dash, and if you fail to dodge it is when you recall. This means that you should always be controlling your dashes, and especially as you're learning, you should always try and have at least 2 dashes up before going for anything risky. You're free to use your dashes for mobility and to move around the map, but if you're going to start shooting at people, try and have very close to 2 dashes when possible. One of the most important parts of Tracer is understanding the distance at which you do damage. Tracer has an enormous fall-off range at 13 meters. This means that if you are 13 meters or closer to your target, you will be dealing maximum damage with each bullet you hit, of course, depending on the spread and the size of the target and the meters you're away from. But the moment that you're at 14 meters, your damage is drastically reduced. This doesn't mean it's completely useless. You can still pepper people with this damage from afar, you can still distract them, you can still call attention to yourself if you really want people to start focusing you, but you're not going to get a lot of kills unless the person is already very low. You have to learn and get a feel for when 13 meters is, and you can go into the practice range and stand at these lines to make sure you're at 13 meters to experience the difference yourself. But in game, this will come with practice. When it comes to the mentality, I want you to think more that you're a Reaper with a very, very high mobility instead of Tracer, because you really do need to get very close and personal to deal damage, even if ideally you want to maintain somewhere between 10 and 13 meters with a lot of your targets. One of the best habits that you can have as a beginner Tracer is to plan a route right from the beginning of every match. The moment that you identify what the enemy team composition is, you should make a clear note of what you're going to avoid and what you're going to try and go for. At the moment, with the way that Cassidy can hinder you with his magnetic grenade, I would recommend that you just don't try to duel him, because not only can he one-shot you, if he has his magnetic grenade up, he can destroy you with very little effort. So especially if you're just learning the character, I don't want you to occupy your head with also having to track Cassidy's magnetic grenade cooldown to know if you can go on him or not. It's much more efficient to just decide that you're going to ignore Cassidy unless he's, the only target left, and you're going to go around him and for other targets. There are tanks that you can annoy and distract to get a lot of ult charge, damage, and impact the fight. For example, getting behind a Reinhardt and making him nervous by shooting him from behind tends to work wonders for him to panic, drop his shield, or do something dumb, but other tanks will be completely unfazed by your existence. In those cases, you want to make sure that you also ignore the tank. If they also have something like a Pharah Mercy, well, maybe you should just exclusively focus on whoever is going to be left in the backline alone. For example, a Zenyatta or a Lifeweaver or an Ana or a Baptiste. The other thing that is very important to start learning early on as you start playing Tracer is the map layout and where the health packs are. The second enormous strength that Tracer brings to a team is not only the resources that she steals from the enemy team, but it's the resources that you don't need to put into her from your team. With the amount of mobility that Tracer has, as well as her recall, she really doesn't require a lot of healing when played correctly. This means that your team has one person less that they should worry about. But for that, you need to know when to leave and quickly move through health packs to re-engage without ever needing to return to your team. However, if you are stuck in a bad situation, this is why you should always control your number of dashes and make sure you have enough to dash all the way back to your team. Never bait your team into going for you because that generally will not work out. If you are already on an advantage, for example, if you've taken down the enemy tank and maybe one support, it's not uncommon for supports to dash onto you, things like Kiriko or Mercy, to support you in the backline and clean up the fight. But otherwise, you shouldn't be needing the support's help. Understandably, at the beginning, you might, but your objective should always be to require the least amount of resources from your team as possible. So to summarize the beginner section, start keeping track of your dash cooldown and only use your recall for emergencies. Good discipline on recall will be the difference between an excellent Tracer and a good one. Start learning your damage range and get into the habit of getting closer to your opponents than what you probably think is necessary. And start looking for health packs. Remember where they are and start memorizing routes that you commonly take to flank and how to move through them using those health packs. Moving on to the advanced section of this guide, we're going to shift our perspective and try and imagine a lot of what we are doing from the enemy's perspective. As I said in the thought experiment at the beginning, whenever a specific character is not doing what they are best at and instead dedicating resources to chasing you around, you are stealing value from the enemy. This means that you have to make smart decisions about how to distract the enemy even when you can't be as efficient in going in. The first crucial learning point for me at an intermediate level for Tracer is making sure that you never back out of a fight by going back to your team. If you are consistently finding value and able to dive the backline and have good awareness of the map and how you move around it, now it's time to find ways to move around it while also distracting people. It's very common for newer players or people who are still getting the grips of a specific character to first focus on the idea of getting into the backline and then think about doing damage. This is easier to overcome with other characters. It's easy to walk up to a flanking position as Reaper and try and do some damage on shields while you go. It's very critical for a Genji to be poking his way to different positions as they are looking for that kill and that reset in order to snowball and really take over. But Tracer is a little bit more special because people will always be looking for and hunting a Tracer, and Tracer doesn't want to abuse cover for too long. Most of your value comes from drawing attention to you, even if nobody is using anything on you. If they're looking at you or just spraying in your direction or have to be aware that you are there as a threat, you are obtaining value. So as I said before, you never want to head back to your team if you can avoid it. There are moments and maps where that is necessary. Long hallways on specific payload maps where really the only option is to head all the way back. On things like control points or bigger maps, if you go in for an engage, get some cooldowns, and get scared out, you shouldn't turn tail and head back to your team because you're not going to provide distraction and therefore you're not going to obtain value from the comfort of behind your Reinhardt's shield. Instead, you should have escape routes planned, places that you can go to that will require your opponent to either keep you present in their mind as a threat or to commit resources to chasing you down in that direction, which would be bad for them to do because they have to waste even more time not giving resources to their team. In other words, if you end up in a bad situation and you have controlled your dash as well, maybe you used recall because you got anti-naded or something like that, after you recall, you should head deeper in or to a side, not back to your team. While you are doing this, depending on the circumstance, it is valuable for you to use your spray to distract people, especially if it's in the middle of a crazy hectic fight. While some players, the better ones, will understand that there is a tracer and they are trying to distract them, and therefore they will ignore your damage and just keep pushing on whatever objective they've decided to do or trying to eliminate the target they've chosen, other people will get nervous and they will turn around and they will waste time or they will hesitate to advance just by knowing that you're there. And you can use that spray as you move to distract them and make them paranoid, which is why I said I want you to imagine it from the enemy's perspective. If you are a character like Hanzo or Widow and you're perched on high ground and nobody can touch you and suddenly something hits you from behind and you turn around and nothing is there, you're starting to get paranoid and you already took away a couple of shots from that character that aren't going straight into your team and potentially one-shotting someone. This is what I mean with maximizing efficient movement while distracting. And making a good choice between letting your presence be known or hiding is very important, and it's part of the decision making that goes into playing Tracer every 2 seconds. Another thing that you should take advantage of now that you're in the advanced section of this is trying to go for Oneclips. Now, it's very difficult to get a complete Oneclip with Tracer, especially since her spread got even more nerfed, but you can still pull off the Oneclip plus melee combo. Of course, if you're point blank, this just means that instead of reloading, a quick melee will give you the 30 points of damage you need to get the elimination, but in other cases, you're going to have to combine dashing with meleeing, which will require very, very good control of exactly the distance that the dash covers and a very quick press of the melee button. I personally have my melee bound to one of the side mouse buttons, and by simultaneously right-clicking and hitting this button, I can do the melee dash, but you have to get a feel for it, so just try it out yourself. There's no harm in missing it since you'll probably be next to your target and you'll finish them off one way or another. At this point in time, you should also be experimenting with flashier and riskier engages. Some of my favorites include positioning yourself on a piece of high ground and double dashing forward, falling on top of the enemies. And you should also be getting a good feel for distance and angle of engagement instead of just distance. You can't hit every shot, you can't one-clip every person, and sometimes you're going to miss a lot. So if you want to maximize what Tracer is meant to do, don't engage from the front or even directly from the back. Find the angles that you find the most comfortable on certain characters depending on the map and have them turn away from the action to face you and use that to your advantage. I normally try and engage from the side at a point where it's still a blind spot, and once they turn to face me, I will dash to their back. And that way they are just spinning their camera around confused while you maximize your movement in the brief periods where you are not dashing. Precisely this idea of efficient movement and having access to health packs and multiple angles to initiate are why Tracer has only become stronger within Overwatch 2, since push maps, the ones with the robot, are all very, very good for Tracer. They have a lot of ground to cover, so it's useful to be using your dashes for mobility, and they all have so many different angles that you can approach from. Some of the new control maps like Antarctica also have plenty of flanking routes and different angles for you to approach from. It's precisely some of the older maps that don't favor Tracer that well, and where you might be more reliant on your team being able to cause enough chaos to slip in undetected, or to just get into the mix and start damaging people. At this point, you should also be using the general rule that you should never be taking a gunfight if you have less than 1.5 dashes, and that if you want to full commit for a duel, you should only enter it at around 2.5 dashes. This means that during the duel, you will probably end up using a total of 4 dashes, which should be enough to dodge any skill shots in the game and reposition accordingly depending on how you gauge your opponent. At this point, I hope you have a very good idea of how Tracer is played. The last piece of the puzzle is using Pulse Bomb efficiently. This is something that you have to get a feel for, and throwing it is never really that easy, but there are some codes for workshop maps where you can practice throwing them and use them in a circuit style to practice different techniques and throws using them. I'll make sure to leave those codes in the description of this video, just below the like button, by the way. Before we move on to the expert section of this guide, I would like to remind you that you can subscribe to this channel. It's completely free. I don't only do Overwatch content, but it's a lot of what I'm doing currently. In general, I just like making good videos, and if you like that as well, subscribing helps me tremendously. Additionally, one of my main goals with this video is to make sure that newer players are not afraid to pick up Tracer and learn her. Do not be discouraged. I said it at the beginning of the video, but it's a process. You can make it through. You just have to have good ideas and follow a specific mindset in how you are actually going to be improving. Now that we've covered most of the essentials and the mindset that you should have to improve as Tracer, let's talk about some of Tracer's matchups. We're going to start off with the bad matchups, the ones that you should avoid. On the support tier list, you should always be wary of Brigitte. She is always going to shut you down and make it very difficult for you to act. She is the only #1 threat that you have on support. Moira can be good against Tracer if they focus you down, but you're still taking their resources and you should always keep recall for it. Not to mention that the best way to face a Moira is to be confident in your shots and try and one-clip them to the head. If you get a feel for the hitbox, you're going to win that duel every single time if it's a 1v1. Lifeweaver can be a little annoying, but is not the end of the world. Kiriko can be a threat just as much as Ana, because Kiriko can hit you to the head and melee you to instantly delete you. And Ana, with recent buffs, can 2-tap you. However, I think these are skill matchups, and it's very easy to bait their cooldowns. You can often find them together, and just having them use Suzu and then having them use Anti, it's really a question of not dying while you bait out the cooldowns. And if you can get them without them and have good movement, you can really 2v1 them once you get good at it. Zen is always a threat, just don't get kicked and discorded because that hurts a lot, but really you should only be worrying about Brigitte, to be honest. When it comes to DPS, your #1 counter at the moment is Cassidy, no question. Cassidy can hinder you and absolutely destroy you. So if you're going against the Cassidy, be mindful of it. Genji can be a little bit of a threat if they are good, because their damage can come so fast and just eliminate you before you have a chance to react and recall. But it's really skill dependent on that Genji. Torbjorn has always been used as a natural counter along with Junkrat, Tor because the turret will track you. When movement is one of your biggest pros to avoid getting damaged, his turret will slowly whittle you down. And Junkrat because he can just spam trash damage everywhere and accidentally kill you by a grenade bouncing through a wall if he just camps a route that he knows Tracers like to take. Sombra is a little bit of a skill fight. You just have to survive through the hack and then kind of get out of dodge. She can be annoying to deal with, but it's not the end of the world. After that, I would say that most DPS are just going to be skill dependent. Tracer really has the tools to move around so many different things and to evade threats that it wouldn't be a problem. If anything, I would say Soldier's ability to one-tap you with Helix rockets can be very annoying. And of course, his ultimate does technically counter you, but you can also just dash to cover and make him wasted if he doesn't react quickly. Tracer is specifically very good against things like Widow and Hanzo if they're not positioned in places where they can't be hit. And even though Pharah might seem like a counter, it's very difficult for a Pharah to kill a Tracer if you're paying attention to her. And even then, it's still possible that you can one-clip her if you catch her at a moment when she's going downwards. Symmetra can be a problem with her turrets, but really, once again, it's just about dashing through. I would be wary of Ashe as she can one-shot you to the head. Other than that, it's all about skill, which is one of the reasons that Tracer is so valuable and so fun to play, because she feels very rewarding and skill dependent instead of just simply, oh, I got countered. In the tank department, Sigma can take up a lot of space and protect his team very quickly by turning around. And because he can multitask, he can kind of defend from you and from your team at the same time. But once those cooldowns are up, it's really not that big of an issue. Ramattra can always be difficult if they get a good position on you, and Orisa can be a pain in the ass, but all you have to do is ignore her and you will win most of the time. If anything, Winston can be the biggest annoyance, but it's not really that big of a deal. So generally, I would say that there are no hard counters except for Zarya bubbles, which is just another way to negate your pulse bomb and to just annoy you all of the time, as well as turning around and not only protecting her backline, but getting more damage on one of the most consistent damaging abilities so that she can finish you off in just a couple of seconds if she can track well enough. Aside from this, Tracer really isn't a hard counter to anyone because she is really good depending on how you pilot her into so many different things. I've often seen people say that she's excellent against Bastion, because she is, and I've also heard people say that she's excellent against Ball, and I do have a lot of fun chasing down balls, and they never expect how quickly you can melt them. But overall, I think that she is very balanced in how the matchups work, because her kit is specifically designed to just be very skill-oriented. As a bonus, since you're here at the expert level, if you really want to feel that you are maximizing Tracer's ability, I would generally say that you want to be obtaining anywhere between 3 to 4 eliminations per life at a baseline. That doesn't mean you solo kill people, but that means you participate in 4 kills without dying. Of course, you can add eliminations in your mind if you really want to calculate it based on how important cooldowns can be. I frequently find myself forcing things like Zenyatta and Lifeweaver Ultimate on a good dive in critical moments, and I would count that even higher than a basic elimination, since if they're not used in a way that was efficient for their team, so if a Zenyatta uses their ultimate to protect themselves, and then immediately after your team can do a wombo combo because they don't have to worry about the Zenyatta ultimate, that was basically a team-winning dive, and you forced them into a situation that was guaranteeing you a win. This is also why Tracer just feels so excellent to play. You end up going into a flow state with her, where you're just gliding throughout the battlefield, analyzing the situation, choosing your targets and changing them on the fly, and you feel like an agent of chaos. I really do believe that Tracer embodies... I do believe that when it comes to character fantasy, Tracer lets the player feel exactly what the character wants to do, and her playstyle matches that fantasy perfectly. You are the zippy-zappy annoying little fly, bothering everybody around the battlefield, taking their attention, grabbing their resources, making them frustrated before going in when you're least expected to pull off a spectacular play. And when that fantasy comes true, there is simply not another character in Overwatch that can feel that satisfying, at least in the perspective of fulfilling that fantasy. Sure, getting 5 headshots in a row on Hanzo can be amazing, but that is simply you having good aim. Tracer feels so unique in how she affects the battlefield, like a MOBA character would, and I think that the more that you tap into that feeling and try to channel that in your gameplay, the more efficient you will be. So once again, I've been Mugthief. I hope that this guide has been useful for you. It took a heck of a lot of time to get all the footage for it and to record it and all of these things. But thank you very, very much for watching, and enjoy, and don't let anybody discourage you. The important thing is that you improve, you feel that improvement, and you feel good doing it. And hopefully, I'll see you all online.